Welcome to the Real Marriage Podcast with Mark and Grace Driscoll.
From my library at home.
Yes, it's exciting. But we're going to continue talking about your...
first ever men's book, Act Like a Man.
A Man.
And if you're triggered and offended by that, it's literally just a verse in Corinthians that says to act like a man. And if you're a young person that went to a government school, the two big ideas there, number one, there's men. Number two, they should act like it.
Yes.
So I'm just trying to help the cause.
Yes. It's an exciting book, and you've been working on it for a lot of years because God's been working in you for a lot of years. And so it's great that it's finally out, and it's a super helpful book. So we're going to talk a little bit about what it means to be a man in the context of marriage. And so what do you want to say about that?
Yeah. And just so you know, you go to realfaith.com, the Act Like a Man talks are there. The book is there. I'm not taking any proceeds from it. I've waited more than 30 years to write a book for men. Now that we've been faithfully married for over 30 years. I've been teaching the Bible for over 30 years. We've got 3 sons, son-in-law, 2 grandsons, and one in the womb ready to enter the world. So been field testing these ideas. And so, in this podcast, we really want to focus on you men and you men that are husbands or aspire to be husbands. So I'm going to hit one section from the book. But here are the chapters. Man, own your identity. Son, worship your father. Sage, learn your lessons. A worker, do your job. Artist, create culture. Steward, build his kingdom. Husband, love your princess. We're going to get into that in this episode. Father, leave your legacy. And warrior, slay the dragon. So we'll talk about marriage. You ready? So there's a big myth out there that it's better to be single. In fact, there's an entire generation of young people that are really not planning on marrying and not planning on having children. And all the statistics indicate that one of the best things a man can do is get married. So you can be honest, permission to speak freely, be nice. We're in my study. But if we weren't married, what do you think I would be like if I was just a single guy? I mean, it's a horrifying thought.
Yeah, do I have to think about that?
Well, I mean, just for the sake of, being grateful for where we are.
Yeah, I mean, God saving you was obviously the biggest thing.
Yeah, God saved
at 19. And I mean, without that, there's no way we'd be sitting here. You'd be doing all kinds of things you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
I don't know that I need to get specific.
Yeah, I would be a naughty boy. Would we be married if it wasn't for Jesus, the Bible, church intersecting our lives? No. Would I have a healthy relationship with children?
No, I mean, you've always had a heart for kids that's kind of unique. Not all guys like kids. Yeah, you've
really
always liked kids. But yeah, it wouldn't be as emotionally healthy, I would say.
Yeah. What do you think our sons would be like if it wasn't for Jesus, Bible, church, and intersecting my life?
I mean, they'd all be different because they're different personalities, but they wouldn't see who God is as a loving father and as a gracious and generous father. Because that's what you've been to them, to show them pieces of who God is. They'd probably be angry. They'd probably be bitter.
Pretty major father with a lot of brokenness. Yeah. So I always like to say God didn't just save me from hell. God saved me from me. Mm-hmm. And God saved others from me. And the worst enemy in a man's life is usually that man. Because it's the decisions that we make as men that self-destruct and implode our own lives and cause pain in our marriage and our children and our family and legacy of generations. So I want to talk from the Act Like a Man book, and let me just give you the statistics from a book called The Case for Marriage. And so The Case for Marriage, I think it was so The Case for Marriage is they look at all the statistical, sociological data, and they say, even if you don't believe in the Bible, which you should, and we do, if you just look at the evidence, just follow the proverbial science, the social science, marriage is good for men. So
I mean, it was God's first command.
Yeah, it's not good to be alone. If you've ever seen a single
Leave
guy,
leave.
you're like, yeah, I can see that. Men who are married live nearly 10 years longer than their unmarried peers.
Wow.
Why do you think that is? Why would a guy who's married live 10 years longer?
Because a woman's taking care of them and they're not taking care of themselves.
That's very sexist.
Yeah, I know, but it's true.
It's true.
Needs a helper.
So let's just be honest. Who puts the vitamins in my case?
Yeah, you'd be taking all kinds of weird stuff or not taking anything at all.
Yeah.
Doing your own vitamin dosing.
Oh, no, I wouldn't do vitamins. I mean, before we met, I always like to say I had a pretty Eto's diet. Taquitos, Doritos, Cheetos, Fritos, burritos. I really stayed within the
Tito's pizza.
Yeah. Tito's pizza. Yeah. I stayed within the Eto's family. That was my diet. And so I would have eaten myself to death. Men don't go to the doctor. Men tend not to eat anything green. We just live on a brown diet. Men as well, if they don't have a wife and kids, they don't have to be as attentive to their health because there's nobody else depending on them.
Might be a workaholic, or the other side of the spectrum might be lazy because they don't have anything to work for.
Or an alcoholic. If you got a wife and kids, eventually they're like, hey,
Gotta get up and do something.
stop drinking, go cut the grass. Okay, how about this one? Married men are 50% less likely to die at any age than unmarried men. So just the possibility of remaining alive is better with a wife. Why is that?
Well, there's so many reasons. It's more joyful. You get to have sex. Well, I mean, I guess if you're single and godless, you could do that too. But having purpose beyond
companionship,
beyond just yourself.
partnership, somebody to live for, somebody to be responsible for, somebody to look after. Once you got a wife, you're like, she needs me. And then you have kids, you're like, they need me. It just causes a man to just get up, even if he's discouraged or even depressed, and say, I got to get going today because people need me. How about this one? Married men are less likely than single men to suffer from long-term chronic illnesses or disabilities.
Back to the needing a helper because he wouldn't take care of himself.
So food, diet. How about environment? I mean, most guys that don't have a wife, their home environment is not quite the same.
Yeah, and they just don't have anybody to bounce life off of. I mean, you're supposed to consider one another in marriage, and I have wisdom in certain areas, you have wisdom in certain areas. We're better together because we don't know everything individually, and we can Google it or study it, but practically it's just better for each of us to be considerate of wisdom in each other's lives for each other's lives.
So that would mean if you don't get married, your life is worse. And if you get divorced, your life is worse. So statistically, just figuring it out, we always like to say, sometimes you're like, I need a new spouse. No, you don't. You need a new marriage with the same spouse. And you can get a new marriage without getting a new spouse. How about, are about 30% more likely to rate their health as excellent or very good than unmarried men? We hit that. Oh, here's one. Married men drink about half as much as their unmarried peers of the same age. So that whole, my wife drove me to drink.
Yeah.
That's a false prophecy. That is not what's happening.
No, I mean, they don't have to cope in other ways because they get to have a relationship where they can talk things through and figure out, again, wisdom and life. You can pray together. You can resolve things together instead of grabbing a bottle or some other addiction to try and coat over the problem. You're actually dealing with it because wives tend to want to deal with stuff.
Well, and most wives tend to be more verbal, more relational.
They draw them out.
Yeah, draw them out. And most men don't have that kind of friendship with other men. It would be good if you could. But like when I've got a long, hard day and I come home, I mean, one of my favorite things, as you know, is I like to hold hands and go for a walk. Like, turn our phones off. Let's just go for a walk and just verbal process and talk. And most men that don't have that, it sounds like they just go home and they get depressed and they pour a drink. And if you're depressed and drinking, your depression gets worse.
That's right. It's a depressant.
Yeah, and so how about this one? married men are less likely to smoke, drink, and drive too fast. I don't know about that.
Not in your case.
Get into fights. And I will say this. Hey, let me just hit this real quickly.
I'm a better, faster driver than you.
You want to be a race car driver in
Yes,
heaven.
I do, because you can't die in heaven.
Yep. And for me, I find it very frustrating. We've got the Ford Bronco, and I just want to say to whoever the engineers are that put a governor at 102 miles an hour, it's like,
shakes after that.
yeah, after that, it throttles back. And you're like, hey, I'm a grown man. I will determine in my personal prayer time with the Lord what I feel like a safe speed is, and I don't need the freaking nanny state putting a governor on my Bronco.
Anyway.
Yeah, well, it's just an observation. So married men are less likely to smoke, drink, and drive too fast, get into fights, or take risks that increase their chance of accidents and injuries. So why do you think a married guy is going to be taking less risks with his life?
Well, because he has people that he's responsible for.
Sure.
And he also cares about them and wants to enjoy them for as long as possible.
Yeah, so if your wife's preggo and you're like, hey, I'm going skydiving during your third trimester, she'll be like, hey, don't. Right. Well, you need to be here for the kid.
Yeah.
And somebody's got to go to work.
Yep.
So
It's a good load and responsibility for a man to carry.
well, I say in the Act Like a Man book, I talk about men are like trucks. They drive straighter with a load. I've said this for decades. You get a young guy with no responsibility. He's like a two-wheel drive truck in a snowstorm. He's all over the road and eventually he's in the ditch. You load a man up like, here's your God, here's your responsibility, here's your job, here's your wife, here's your kids, here's your volunteer position at church, here's your mortgage, here's your medical. He's like, oh my gosh, I better keep this thing straight and narrow and get going and make progress.
Yep.
And so this is why the more responsibility that a man can take earlier is going to allow him to be a better, stronger man. And so for you guys that are in your 20s, yes, I'm talking to you.
It's tough to be dependent on the Lord because it's a lot of responsibility, but you do need to be independent with what your responsibilities are.
Well, and there's something great, I'll just tell you, about being a man when you put in a long, hard day at work and you come home and your wife and kids are indoors because you provided a home and the lights are on because you paid the bill, and you sit down for dinner and there's food to eat because you put it on the table. There's something as a man, you're like, that's a lot of responsibility. A lot of people are depending on me. But there's something deeply, profoundly satisfying and enriching about that.
Yeah, there's fruit.
And it's like, that's what I was made for. I was made to bless women and children, starting with my wife and kids. This one I think is interesting. Married men make significantly more money than bachelors. One of the big lies we're telling single men, and teach them a ton, one is don't get married. You want to make as much money as you possibly can. Married men make more money. Why do you think that is?
Gives them more drive. I don't know.
Motivation. Your wife's like, our kid needs braces. And you're like, okay, I got to go get a bonus.
Or to figure out a promotion.
Yeah. The car blew up and, the kids don't all fit in the stroller. You got to go find me a minivan.
And I think God blesses and honors men who want to be providers, protectors, want to be loving toward their wife and kids and be a blessing to their wife and kids. I think God blesses that because you're going with the command that God has given you as a man, and he wants to be a generous God with those who are walking with him and doing what he's asking you to do and your roles and responsibilities.
We've definitely seen that. And the Bible does say that God's a father and I'm his son. And I always think of it this way. If I told one of our three sons, hey, here's what you need to do, and they looked at me and they said, hey, Dad, I love you, I trust you, I want to do that. Will you help me? Help me learn how to do that. 100% of the time, the answer is, well, yeah, if you're my son, I love you, I'm your dad. If you want to do the right thing and you want me to help you, well, I would love to help you. Yes. So God's a father, we're his sons. And if the father says, and he does say in a book of the New Testament, Paul writes to Timothy, If a man does not provide for the needs of his family, he's denied the faith and he's worse than an unbeliever, which is that's a Scooby-Doo verse. That's a ruh-roh verse for men. And every time I've quoted it, it goes viral online, and then I get banned because they put me in timeout for violating the quote-unquote community standards, which is apparently a community
So
of losers.
toxic.
Yeah. So this patriarchal, toxic masculinity that has crazy ideas like working a job is intolerable in our Intolerista day. Nonetheless, I think, I know God is willing to help. And there is an incentive. And as an employer, I mean, I've got a couple of nonprofits and I've run organizations. If I see a guy who's like, mid to late 30s, never been married, doesn't have a wife, doesn't have any kids, my first thought is...
aspire to.
Yeah, doesn't aspire to. It's like, is he a responsible adult? Why is he not taking on more responsibility? And so there is something about when you see a guy get married, has a wife, has kids, has a mortgage, and he's motivated, even as an employer, it's like that guy is probably more motivated.
Yeah.
And as a result, he's probably going to be more productive. How about this one? Married men experience faster wage growth than unmarried men, meaning not only do they make more money, they make it more quickly, and they get raises and promotions prior to single men. It's a motivation. I mean, I can still remember, maybe we'll go back on this. We were both working, felt called into ministry. God said, Mary Grace, preach the Bible, train men, plant churches. When I was 19, spoke to me audibly. I was like, okay, that's what I'm doing. So that's what we've been doing ever since. But as soon as you got pregnant with our first daughter, Ashley, you had to maybe tell them about your job and your income and then your pivot.
Well, I think I was making more than you at the time because you were trying to figure out what God's calling meant.
How to do ministry.
Yeah. So
I was teaching the Bible to
money.
college kids, which, just so you know, they don't have any money.
bills.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was working in advertising, trying to pay off my small bit of school debt, and got promoted to a different part of the company. I was doing well, and was being offered even another promotion, and got pregnant. And I had always strongly felt the calling to be home as a mom and not work outside of the home. It's not a sin, but for me, that was what God had asked of me specifically, and so that I could focus on that, and the calling that he gave you in ministry becomes my calling as well. And so for me, I knew that time was ending for me to work outside the home, being pregnant. So I think it was in May, I quit. Ashley was born end of July, and as we were discussing it, you were asking, okay, what are we going to do? What do finances look like? And I'm very frugal with budget and everything. I'm a saver. And so I knew that because God had called me to be a stay-at-home mom, I knew that God would provide. I knew it was going to be through Mark. I knew Mark was a hard worker, so I wasn't worried about that. I really honestly never worried about you getting off the couch and figuring it out. But I think it was scary. It was like that first step of, oh my gosh, I'm going to have a child and a wife to provide for. But I just told you, I said, I'm not working. So you got to figure it out, and I'll encourage you, but I'm not going back to work. So
yeah,
let's pray.
Yeah, literally, you should stay close to the mic, sweetie pie. Literally, you said something like, well, that's your responsibility. I'll be praying for you. You got to figure it out. And I was like, man, her name is Grace, but not feeling it.
Sorry, it was probably a little harsh.
No, it was fine. It was fine. But it was like, okay, for the rest of our life, you and the kids are depending on me. And there is no safety net. It's me. Every day I got to get up. I got to go to work. I got to generate revenue. I got to, by God's grace, he's going to provide for the family through me. And honestly,
You've done awesome.
That was, God's been very gracious. But honestly, it was like, okay, this is massive motivation. Mm-hmm. And so I would say for you men, we've got to own that responsibility. And we're not saying that it's a sin for a woman to generate revenue. We're not saying that. What we are saying is it is a sin for a woman to cover a man who acts like a son rather than a husband, and acts more like a dependent than a provider.
Yeah. And if a wife isn't able to focus on marriage and family, and your marriage and family are falling apart and you're working, you may need to consider refocusing and reprioritizing, and the man may need to step up so that she can get some focus that's, more prioritized in the marriage first and then the kids.
Couple more. I won't hit them all from the Case for Marriage book. How about this one? Men who are married make more responsible financial decisions than single men. So not only do married men make more money, they get raises and promotions more quickly, they spend their money more wisely.
Yeah, because they can't just flit around.
You can't be selfish. You can't just go out and, I'm going to spend all my money on leisure and travel and hobbies and tech and toys and guns and boats and golf. And because at some point the wife is like, we need diapers and strollers and car seats.
I mean, hopefully that means the husband and wife are communicating together about a budget instead of my money's my money because I'm making it. You've never made me feel that way, even though you were the wage earner in the family.
No, I'll just say, Steve, real quick, not to interrupt you, but like when you're one, that includes your finances. And any guy who says, well, I make the money, therefore it's my money, never say that again. Because you make the babies and you don't look at me and say, these are my babies. I'm like, hey, these are our children and these are our dollars.
That's right.
Yeah. Why do you think, as well, married men are going to make better financial decisions with the money they do generate?
Well, because if you're doing it together, if you're making those decisions together, you're considering all the other people in your family, not just your own desires.
Yes.
And I think, you've not had necessarily hobbies outside of, you love studying and ministry work, but you've not gone off and had a lot of hobbies. You appreciate just time with the family, and that's a resting place for you, or you do go off for solitude, walks to the lake or whatever. Yeah. But I think your priorities and your focus has been, how do I best love and provide for and serve my family?
Yeah. And so, I don't think it's a sin, but I don't fish. I don't golf. I don't hunt. I don't have a bass boat. I don't have toys. I just never have. And part of it is, I feel like, number one, time with you and the kids is a high priority. And ministry has been kind of all consuming. So right now I'm a senior pastor of a church, and I'm the founder of Real Faith Ministry. So I've technically got two jobs and have to produce a lot of content, books like Act Like a Man and sermons about it. And I love all of that. I love what I do, and I'm very grateful for it. But I find that after work and you and the kids, especially when the kids were growing up and the boys had, baseball and daughter had track, like there's just not any extra time. I don't have any extra time. And when the kids were little, it's like, we don't have any extra money.
Yeah.
So for me, it was like, I'm not going to have a lot of hobbies, but I'm going to make a lot of memories with my family. Yeah. And so for me, that shifted all of our financial decisions. And it meant that I couldn't put myself first in the budget, well, dad wants a this or dad wants a that. It's like, no, wife, God first, wife, kids. And then usually you're like, that's everything we have, How about this one? Married men report less depression, anxiety, and other psychological distress than single men. Psychologically, mentally, emotionally, married men are just doing better.
Yeah, Genesis says it's not good for a man to be alone. It's the first time God said something was not good after creation.
And that's before sin enters the world.
Exactly. And so it's just true. God is the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and community is what keeps us healthy. Yeah. And so healthy community is what keeps us healthy. And the first healthy community is wife and kids. And so it makes sense to me. That's God's created order and his command. So I think if a man is opening himself up to it, it means vulnerability, it means humility, it means growing in character, it means growing in responsibility, but it also means enjoying other people in your life relationally, spiritually. And so I think, we've talked about this, but just who we would each be without each other, we just wouldn't be emotionally healthy people, because we've challenged each other in those areas in good ways, in hard ways, but in good ways. And we've had to grow. Whereas if you're just a bachelor, you don't have anybody challenging you in that. You just get to be selfish and be whoever you want to be.
Well, and guys that are single and they're struggling, there's a whole men's mental health, market that's large and emerging. And it's like, go into yourself. How do you feel? And it's like, well, sometimes the key is not to go into yourself, but to go up to God and out to your wife and kids. Mm-hmm. And sometimes by just going in to look at why you're struggling, it doesn't help you or heal you, because it's by going out to God, wife and kids, that you find more joy. And what I find with the kids when they were little, our youngest is 18, just graduated, launching. So we're basically empty nesters here soon, a couple months. We've got grandkids coming. So grandkids 3 and 4 are on the way. So we're sending them out and welcoming new generation in. But for me, coming home, even from a long, hard day at work, or a lot of criticism or, attack or whatever may have been in store for that week, coming home to you and the kids was like, praise God, this finally my people, my family, my home. And then one of the beautiful things about kids, they don't know what your day was like, and they don't care. So they don't want to ask, like, well, did Tom talk trash about you, at the performance review again? Instead, they're just like, hey, let's do a tea party, Dad. I'm your little princess. Hey, Dad, get your glove on. It's time to go play catch. Hey, Dad, can we go for a bike ride? Dad, can we play wiffle ball? Just, that those were all the options when I would come home from work. And it was like, you know what? I get to think about somebody else, and I get to do something that somebody else wants. Mm-hmm. And there's a profound sense of emotional, spiritual, mental joy in that. Yeah. It's like, you know what? Let's go have fun. Mm-hmm. Like even now with our grandsons, I love them and they're fun, they're cute. But even when I show up, like, they don't know what I was dealing with and they don't care. And instead I just get to enter into their world and have fun with them. Mm-hmm. And lately that means wrestling, and they try to take my beard off because they don't understand my beard. How about this one? Single men, I'll just do one more. Married men are half as likely as singles and cohabitating men to say that they are unhappy with their life. So just statistically, the men who are happiest with their life are married with kids. Those are the guys that enjoy their life the most.
Be fruitful and multiply once again. I mean, God's way works.
But you think about it, babe. So nobody tells you this in school. Nobody tells a young guy in school, like, okay, you want to enjoy your life? Well, act like a man. First of all, be a heterosexual male. Mm-hmm. Exercise dominion over yourself. Like the Bible says, marry a woman, not just marry a woman, mm-hmm. And then have kids after you're married. And take responsibility to lovingly lead and provide for your family. And if you will do that, the things that the Bible clearly states that causes us to act like a man, you're going to be a happier man. You're going to make more money. You're going to have better mental health. You're going to live longer. You're not going to kill yourself. And you're not going to be drunk every night.
Yeah, I mean, it works. That's why God said it.
Well, and it's works for thousands of years. Otherwise, none of us would be here.
Well, and sociologists now have the success sequence that they've figured out, oh, this is how it should be. It's like, yeah, that's what God said.
Yes. So for you guys that are hearing this, Act Like a Man, first book I've written on manhood. It deals with this and many more issues. Super practical, super readable. It's in plain English. If you're a heterosexual guy who knows how to drive a stick shift, you can still read this book. And if you're a wife and you want to figure out what a man is supposed to be and do, if you're a single gal and you're like, what should I be looking for in a dude? Yeah. If you're a mom or a single mom trying to raise a son, or you're like us, grandparents pouring into young grandsons, or you're a spiritual leader or a coach or a teacher, it's just a really practical tool to help you to build up men, to bless women and children, help them act like a man. You can find everything at Real Faith, and we'll do a little bit more in the next episode or two. But thank you, everyone, for tuning in, especially for the men. And I will say this to the men: you are more important than you think, and we need you more than ever. Yes. And so we'll just leave it at that until the next episode.